This is such an incredible pleasure, Indran, Kashiana. Congratulations, both of you have new books of poetry out, and that is something to
Thank you.
truly celebrate. And what wonderful books these are. I mean, the more I delved into them, the more I came out moved to bits, and in very different ways for both the books, I must confess. So, without much ado, let's delve into the themes you tackle in your books and what's precious about them. So, Kashina, maybe we could start with you. Your book is Woman by the Door. Is
Yeah.
there a certain congruity, a thread of commonality in the themes you delve in your collection?
First of all, thank you. I I know you're trying to delve into our books, into both our books, and that itself requires time and effort. So it's much appreciated, both by Indran and me, Sunil. Appreciate it. In terms of Woman by the Door, the themes, the book is divided into three sections. The first section is apertures, the second is portal, and the third is detours. And if you notice, there is a reference to cinema, photography in terms of using those different sections as ideas, with the thought being that your life itself is like a cinema scape moving through, zooming in and zooming out. So that's the broad approach to looking at it. The first section focuses on poems of memory or poems of childhood. You will see a lot. One of Indran's favorite poems I know is about curds and whey in my nanny's house. And so it leans into a lot of memory, with, of course, taking pieces of that memory and what it means more from a universal context with a lens of being a woman and a global citizen. The second poem moves into the place of portals, and the genesis of this book is really that it's a conglomeration of work written over the last 10 years, which is when I made the move from India to the US. And I think I shared this with both of you individually, but the vulnerable aspect of that is that I moved just with my daughter, who was in high school at that time. So it was a moment of great vulnerability for me personally. And as a woman, it was also a moment of great conflict because I was moving for personal reasons, for my professional reasons. I was moving for work. And I pulled this girl who was in her teenage years, right, in high school, and made her move with me purely for selfish reasons because I did not want to be living in a new country all by myself. So there's that aspect of by the door and the transition and what was happening along with that to other relationships. My son and my husband stayed behind in India, so I lived a long distance relationship for almost 3-4 years. And as you both would agree, any relationship, any marriage for that aspect, whether it's 20, 30, 40 years old, needs to be fed and invested in, right,
True,
to sustain and survive.
true.
So that's when coming back to the portal aspect in that section of poems is a lot about growth, transition. There was a lot going on in both countries, India and the
Mm,
US at that time, both in terms of political upheavals,
mm,
as well as, Sunil, you would recollect, and Indran, you probably read about all of that was going on with the rape aspects in India, and
mm,
then the Me Too movement in the US. And that was
mm,
also a time my daughter, who I had, as I said, moved with me to the US, was leaving home, the new home, and moving to college, right? So there was
mm,
a lot of anxiety, let's say that, as a woman, again, to say what is the environment I'm putting her out into, and am I educating her in the right way to be able to deal with all of that. And then, of course, the political aspect, which I don't need to enhance and speak
mm,
more about. Indran's entire work is centered on some of the political aspects, but that was affecting me. And then the third section is detours, which then almost takes a full circle back and delves into theme of loss and grief, which was very personal, from loss and grief of what I had experienced. And while that was a couple of years ago, the geographical distance from my home brought a new lens of how I was looking at loss and grief and my reaction to that loss, as
mm,
well as others around me and their reaction to loss. And the pandemic
Of
in the
course.
last couple of years, of course, added to it. So there's some lens and tinge of that. So to your point, yes, there is a thread there, which one of the main threads being it's a woman at the door moving in and out, both in terms of physical space and time, but also in terms of mental movement and maturity, as well as personally, I was going through that was the phase I was going through menopause. So a lot of physical changes, right? Just as a
Mm,
woman in my
mm.
own self and body and what that was doing to me in terms of self-reflection, which is where some of the titular poem themes, the Woman by the Door poem, speaks to that a little.
Gosh, and the poems are so suffused with gentle nostalgia and, of things past and fleeting. And sometimes like the Kurt poem, the quiet grandeur of the commonplace thing. I mean, they're wonderful,
Thank
wonderful
you.
poems. Yeah, I'm still reading it.
Thank you.
So
Of course you are.
it's,
Yeah, I know I sent it a
yes.
little late to you, but yeah.
Indran, Anne Casey calls your latest book a powerful anthem for social justice, a heartfelt hymn to hope. And the name of your collection, 10,000 Steps Against the Tyrant, is very direct and unambiguous. And Allen
Yes.
Ginsberg himself has given you permission to take names and shoot from the hip. If I'm correct, I read that in one of your poems. So, when did you start writing the collection? And was it a very conscious choice to make it so direct with the names in it and the entire, collective ammunition coming out of you without any stoppage from your side?
What a question, yeah, and thank you, first of all, Sunil, for this generous invitation, and Kashiana, what a glorious response, and thinking about the reasons for why you write what you write. In terms of this book, I mean, a short answer would be I started writing it when the campaign began against the tyrant. I mean, this particular tyrant has orange hair and goes the like the character in Harry Potter, the fellow you can't name, but yet
Yes.
Yeah.
I forget the name of that character. But anyway, his name is Donald Trump, and I write about
Mm,
and I guess I've been an activist as a poet prior to this book. I mean, I'm a Tamil from Ceylon, a country that no longer exists. I mean, it's been renamed Sri Lanka. I'm a member of a minority group, and within the minority, a minority as well. I mean, in terms of religious, I mean, I'm a Catholic Tamil from a certain community in the north of the island. And then, of course, I mean, uh, so it sort of politics, the affairs of the community, polis, the meaning of the Greek word, affairs of the community has been sort of in my blood, poetic blood, for a long time. So, but I'm also now a migrant and an American and an American diplomat as well, which is an unusual thing to represent your adopted country as abroad as a diplomat. Very few countries, if any, allow a first generation migrant to serve in that capacity. So I have a certain sort of wonder and gratitude to the new adopted father and mother, this country that has given me a chance to serve it as its representative. So there's a sort of optimism, and the American dream for me remains a sort of live uh, vitamin, that I'm eating every day and drinking with my morning tea. I mean, it's tea, so I carry tea from my old country, uh, I still have this sort of optimism now. Someone called it perhaps a naivete, vis-a-vis the the challenges of perfecting the democracy, and trying to do it through poetry might seem a bit quixotic, a bit like a character
Mhm.
like Don Quixote or someone railing against windmills. But honestly, and when and in the process of writing these poems, I learned things like that Joe Biden likes poetry and grew, reads poetry,
Yes.
and Kamala Harris is a Tamil in part,
Yes.
and so there's a sort of an identity
Yes.
there, connection, and I celebrate that in one of the poems, looking at her origins, and and I really do believe that poetry can make something happen, although I've always cited Auden's line that poetry makes nothing happen, and said, well, Auden was wrong, or somehow his idea. I'm a great poet, but I've railed against that idea. So I guess in that sense, Allen Ginsberg is more of a model for me than Auden is, in terms of using poetry to effect or to participate in social change and movement, and so now at the same time, I don't want to write agitprop or use language that out of the newspapers or to sociology books or something. I mean, I'm a journalist by training. I have enormous respect for journalism and the role of the fourth estate, but at the same time, I'm a lyrical journalist poet. There's a musical speech is what I consider a poem. I mean, it's a form of verbal music. So I try in these poems, even though the subject may be a very direct address to the people, to get out and vote, to participate in this campaign against the tyrant, to walk their own 10,000 steps. What does that 10,000 mean? I mean, those steps are, the walking apps tell you that if you walk 10,000 steps a day, you're becoming fitter. And what is a fitter American? Let's say, how can the democracy be made fitter? Well, I mean, play your part, walk your steps, go out and vote. Now, at the same time, there are all these restrictions to your voting, and especially post the election of President Biden and so on. These restrictions are coming in hard and fast in many states. So the campaign is endless. It does not stop with the election of this particular president, and the democracy, at least American democracy, seems to always go 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or there are assassinations. I mean, we have witnessed in recent history peacemakers like Martin Luther King and mowed down, but their dream is still coursing through not just the school books, but in the minds of the migrants as well. I mean, I do believe in this American dream, and I try to voice that belief in these poems. At the same time, I don't mind if someone calls some of the poems naive, because it's the sort of, I change that word, its meaning, and I take it on as a badge of courage or something, a sort of innocence, willed innocence, because how else can we wake up in the morning and face not only the mother of elections, but the mother of pandemics? I mean, there are 2 sections to the book.
Yep.
And this particular election took place in the context of this pandemic, which was particularly brutal in the United States. I mean, in terms of numbers felled, and also brutal in terms of the manifestation of ignorance and resistance to science. And for me, the scientific enterprise and the poetic enterprise go hand in hand. I mean, there is a sort of so I mean, by example, I have a cousin who is a senior doctor at Massachusetts General and professor at Harvard Medical School. Now, when he appreciates a poem, you see, there is something has, the poem works.
For sure.
Well said.
So I hope the book elicits some conversations around the breakfast table, the dinner table that it is. that it celebrates the fact that poetry does not have to be complicated or rhetorically
Sure.
flowery. It can go straight, but it has to keep some relationship to music, to rhymes and rhythms and melodies. And I think I'm hoping that the poems here sing, they dance,
Sure.
and I hope that's the beginning of an answer to your question.
Sure.
Thank you.
But in fact, I just can't help asking you this. There was a time when Tagore was accused that whilst the country is in turmoil and the Britishers are
Yes.
running amok, you're writing love poetry. So, how
Mhm.
important is it for a poet to be political, particularly if the whole country is collapsing all around? Would it be justified for a poet to write love poetry?
Oh, I think so, and actually I cover all the bases. I the book that came out just before this one is a book of love poems called Blue Window, a book I wrote in Spanish and translated by another person, Jennifer Rathbun, into English. That was a very rich experience of translation and working with another on. But no, I look, Charles I think it was Reznikov, because of the war and so on. There was I think it was Reznikov who sort of stopped writing poetry for about 5 years or something. I mean, it's a very individual decision. How do you spend your time, and how do you? I mean, Mario Vargas Llosa, the novelist, said that if he had won the election in Peru and had become its president, he would not have written maybe 2 novels or something that he wrote post. Now, is the world and the future generations better off for those 2 novels, or what he may have done as a president? I don't. That's not for me to. But you do make a choice, and I think one can choose to live in the contradictions of. So one can write a love poem, one can write a poem about croissants, as I wrote the other day, or one can write a poem about I'm
about tea. I wrote a poem about tea.
and then write a poem against this
For sure.
this tyrant, And of course, the tyrant, we have tyrants all over the world. I mean, but my particular homegrown tyrant is the one that I addressed in this book. Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Since we talked about food, Kashiana, I can't help but ask you this just now. You have such an intimate relationship with food. I mean, poem after poem, you have the sensuousness of bitter gourd curry. Then there's that zen of curd making. How each pancake is a gospel for you. I mean, what is this endearing relationship you have with food? I mean, it's mouth-watering.
Well, I'm glad
Yes.
you caught that. I'll come. Can I come to that in a second? I want to close on what you were just discussing with Indran about. And my view is, first of all, I consider poetry to be a problem-solving tool for myself, right? It helps me solve problems of whether it's memory that haunts you and you need to get rid of something, right? That's churning in your mind. We all know that anxiety and stress begins in childhood, right? So there's beauty of childhood, but there's also a lot of memories that you need to process and maybe purge in a way. And so it becomes a problem-solving tool for that reason. But also, to go back to the political aspects of it, I think the reason it's so important, and Indran's poetry does what it does, and I'm nowhere close to writing as much but I do write about news and what's happening around us. And I think what poetry does for me, is it offers a distance from the incident or the situation or the person, let's say the orange man in this case, and allows you to express and write something that will be politically more relevant and more impactful than it were if you were very engaged on the ground in the actual situation, right? So I think that's what poetry does for me. I happen to be working as the managing editor with Poets Reading the News. The entire journal is based off of the foundation of journalism, poetry as journalism, or journalism through poetry, whichever way. And Indran mentioned his journalism by profession or by training, right? So when we bring in poems into the journal, the lens we apply is what's the incident or the situation it's responding to, right? And so there was a period of time where everything was about the election political environment, but there were also other topics. But the beauty of reading somebody else's work, and Indran and I are actually going to talk on this subject on a different program a couple of weeks later, is looking at it from the other side of the table as an editor just educates you differently. Because to your point, Sunil, there's love poetry that comes in response to incidents. There's odes, there's sonnets, there's all kinds of forms that come in. It's amazing to see how poets, have picked up threads, even the insurrection a year ago, and the amount of poetry response we got through that. But the variety was necessarily not just about what was happening on the ground, but everything surrounding it, including what may be happening in my own house with a little baby, but with reference to context to the insurrection that's happening outside. So I just wanted to jump in on that. So coming to the food aspect of it, what is it with food? So remember, I carry the name, my last name is Singh, right? So as a community, the Sikh community does thrive, and as a lot of communities do, thrive with what happens in the kitchen, right? And it goes back to the woman aspect of it, because there's politics in the kitchen that happens in households and homes that start with generations of women that have worked. There's also love and training that happens in the kitchen in terms of everything that I might be educated about life happens around the gospel of pancake making, right? Or happens around how you deal with your kitchen in terms of the tidiness of the kitchen or the uncleanliness. So the kitchen is always the center of a lot of activity, and that could be beautiful aspects of food making, but also the ancillary aspects of the politics, the woman-to-woman relationship, how unforgiving women can be to each other about things that may go wrong in food making, and the power struggles of who that dish that's been traveling through generations, who makes it best, right? So there's so much that goes on. I don't think I've even uncovered a layer yet. So that's just to say to you, that's where there's so much of that somehow always pops in, including things like bitter gourd making, which started with my grandmother. And actually, it was a power struggle of who the heck can make bitter gourds well. And she thought she's the only one who could. But of course, that's not what I say in the poem.
Oh, my God. I'll ask you both this question, but maybe you can answer first, Kashiana, because what you talked about food, for example, is also very particular to South Asia. So
yes,
is the diaspora experience, does it find resonance, of their particular experience across the social lines and literary expectations of USA?
So first of all, no question, right? There's the Eastern. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. There's a lot of South Asian community poets that I connect with, and every one of them has something like what I have in my books, which is whether it's making of the stew, right, in the Vietnamese culture, or I'm forgetting the name of the poem, but Kai Coggin's poem, Indran, that's real. I don't know if you've heard it. It's called filling spice jars with my wife a day after my wedding, or something to that effect, right? And it's all about filling spice jars and being in the kitchen and the herbs and the spices and the gathering and the how erotic that process is, right? That's where she takes that poem, and it's beautiful. And I'll send that to you as an afterthought. But in terms of whether it resonates with the United States, well, I'd love for Indran to respond to that as well. I don't think there is anything called the United States response to poetry. United States is a country of people that come from across different parts of the world and country, and therefore has to absorb and imbibe, right, the traits. It is becoming more and more popular in general writing around and on food, just because the so-called local American communities are now opening their kitchen doors, right, their home doors to more cooking from the scratch versus the ready-to-eat culture that pervaded this part of the country or this part of the world. And that, therefore, then automatically opens to the what does that food really mean?
Sure.
That food really means a combination of all of what the diaspora and what the diverse cultures bring to the table. But I'd love to hear from Indran also. And I know that you have the olive oil poem about your mom and her walking into the kitchen late at night to seek that olive oil.
Right. No, I think that, partly it has to do with the pandemic too. I mean, the pandemic, people are spending more time in their kitchens during the pandemic and cooking at home. And obviously they're not going to, or have not been going out to eat to restaurants and so on. And so they've been practicing recipes for the first time. I mean, baking bread.
That's a great
those who have never baked bread before, and so you have this domestic kitchen focus inspired by the circumstances, and poets are always hunting for themes. I remember Yeats at the end of his life saying, "I search for it in vain," and it was in the base of the human heart. But no, so they're looking for themes, and cooking is opening. The kitchen is opening up to them as they
that's great.
They're writing. That said, yes, the United States is full of many migrants from different cultures, but I think that the sort of the politics of cooking at home back in Sri Lanka for me, or the rivalries and the pleasures and the communications, some of that gets dissipated here. I mean, here you are inevitably in a nuclear situation, a nuclear family as opposed to an extended family, usually. And you're also in a much more easy relationship with the conveniences of prepared food from even if it's delivered to you now during the pandemic from a supermarket or a restaurant. But so you do. I mean, that said, it's a different experience. But yes, we can recreate some of what we grew up with here, and we do when we can. And what's interesting, though, for me is how others who don't know coconut milk have now teach me about coconut milk through the food they prepare for me. You see, and I love that. I mean, I love hybrid and learning from, and my father was a poet and a critic, Indran Amirthanayagam. He wrote a book called The Marriage of Continents, and he was always fascinated by what happens when cultures meet across border lines, and in literature, and I think I've inherited that fascination and interest. So for me, when he used to tell me as a child, we were in London at the time, when somebody calls you a wog, well, just remember that means you're a Western Oriental gentleman. You see, just take the word and turn it around.
Wonderful.
Awesome.
So I guess that's what I celebrate also in my poetry to some extent. Yeah, that marriage of continents. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was curious. Kashiana spoke about her roots. You have a very unique view of Sri Lanka as someone who was born there and now can take a periscopic view as diaspora, and also from the work you do in foreign services. So how do your views subsist in you emotionally and politically? Are there conflicts? And does it affect your writing?
Yeah, there are conflicts, but for so many years, poetry sort of goes under the radar. People, at least the American radar. Despite my best efforts to make political poetry relevant to the conversations I'm joking, but no, poetry. So I've been able to write poems about some rather harsh and difficult subjects without and continuing to work as a diplomat and as a But there have been moments in my career when I've had to make a sort of internal decision. I mean, I can say, I mean, I used to write for the Hindu when I lived in India. And I was once offered even a column to write for them, and I had to decline because of some sort of blistering email I received internally saying that you're people know you as a Sri Lankan American diplomat. What you say does get could affect the way we are seen in here in Delhi or in the country. I I had a choice to make at that point: respond to the email from a superior saying, "Well, look, arguing my case," uh, but I felt I didn't want to engage in the bureaucratic fight at that point. I chose the path of least resistance, which is actually declining the invitation to write the column, which of course was hard for me as a writer, because you can imagine a column that could have been read by millions of people in a space. Don Marias used to write that column, and then when he passed away, I don't mean to drop names, but it was a great honor for me that I was even considered, to have that chance. And so I had to say no. Then I said no. Then, and I now write actually two columns, but in the form of poetry, but one in Spanish and one in French, in a newspaper in the Dominican Republic and one in Haiti. But so I do believe that poetry makes something happen. I do believe, and I do want poetry to be engaged with in newspapers and in media. And so that hasn't changed. But yeah, so in long and short of it is, well,
sure.
I think this is the part that you need to cut when you edit.
Not to worry.
Okay.
Kashiana, talking about life, how do you reconcile your senior management day job with your pursuit of poetry?
I do not reconcile.
Okay.
The answer. Much abused, much used terms of so-called work-life balance, right? For so many years, the entire corporate world has been talking about work-life balance. And I've always said there is nothing called work-life balance. What you need to do is work-life synthesization, right? And how your work and your life can synthesize together. And you hit a topic that Indran and I have been going to and fro about again. I live my life in the form of my work being worship, right? And work could be anything. Work can be defined as what I do in my day job, so to say, or what I do in the kitchen, right? Or just the dailiness of what I go about doing every day. Everything to me is work. And if I bring the element of worship to it, and worship, so if you draw the equation mathematically, right? So if work is worship, and worship for me comes in the form of poetry, then there's no need to reconcile anything at all. It starts to come together. And I don't mean to, again, to Indran's point about naivety, I don't mean to sound naive or dismissive about how difficult resolving the so-called work, right? What sustains you financially and et cetera, versus what your creative pursuits are. Maybe I've been blessed to have inherited that thought process and that approach from my father and my parents, or whatever the case may be, but truly with all my heart, that is how I've led my career, right up to the current point of being a senior executive. And it's a valid question, right? Like these are hard, stressful jobs that we do. And if we don't find a way to get them to synthesize, then creating poetry can either be difficult or maybe even close to impossible. On the other hand, my belief is it's actually my poetry, which reverse equation, which gives me the ability to walk into my work every morning with the form of finding moments of worship there. And the moments of worship are what sustains you, not the big picture, the holistic. So breaking it down into small pieces and finding those moments of engaging with a 22-year-old on a team and being able to have teaching and learning moments with a client, right? Or writing an email or writing to clients and using your writing
Yeah.
desire to even make that writing as beautiful as you can. So those are, I can go on and on. That's a topic that probably deserves another hour.
Sure, sure. I mean, there's so much of zen in what you say, because I think that's the only way to live, capture that moment and run with that. I think that's the only way to do it. Indran, when do you write? Do you follow a process, a discipline, a time?
Well, I admit to being prolific, and I write at different times of the day, in the early morning, especially, sometimes late at night. But now, why do I write at different times of the day? Because my day job at the moment has been somewhat relaxed, shall we say, and so I find I have more time to write. My day job, I mean, I continue to be a diplomat. I'm working at the moment at a position virtually in Washington, the State Department, but that's going to change, and I'll need to adjust my schedule when I take on these new duties soon. But at the moment, I'm just taking advantage of this extra time. I write because I need to write on some basic level. It makes me feel happy. It releases endorphins. It's like walking in the morning, which I also do, necessary to my spiritual health and physical health, and as well as emotional health. And I write against solitude, out of solitude, against solitude. I mean, I preach community from a solitary place, So there's this contradiction. I love, and yet, and I feel loved, and that helps me write, and yet I'm, living. Love is a very complicated, wonderful emotion that can come in different ways and through people, and people who are close to you physically, geographically, and people who are very far away, and yet their love travels like light. It comes in to the window in the morning. And I wrote a poem today called "I Love You Too." Just a simple poem. I haven't shared it widely yet because I might be accused of being in love, which
Which is a good
is
thing.
a dangerous. It's a good thing, but it's dangerous to admit it.
Unless it's "I love you too" again.
That's right. But I don't mind admitting it. I mean, but at the same time, one's a little bit afraid, because when you feel this overwhelming emotion, I mean, the famous line about poetry should be emotion recollected in tranquility. So when you're overwhelmed by the emotion, writing at that moment creates a kind of euphoric poem. And I don't know. Maybe I think I'm brave or silly enough to think that I can channel that emotion and produce something worthy, of being read by a stranger, or uh, uh, then, and instead of having to wait it out. And anyway, I'm feeling well, strong, because I write. I feel the love that informs, including this book of political, so to speak, poems, because there are poems in there like "My Love, I'm Voting," or "The Love with My Mother," where I talk about that in various poems, including when she literally voted in this last election. She's 85 now, turning 86, and frail, and so "Late Night Olive Oil" is one of the poems where I speak about this notion of trying to, I mean, as if I can stop decline and passing into the next life or next stage. I think about that king who sat on the beach and tried to stop the waves from washing on the shore. But that's the limits of human possibility,
Sure.
but yet you you explore them in your writing.
Sure,
Um,
sure. Since you mentioned it, would you like to recite olive oil?
Sure, I can. Let me find the poem. It's called Late Night Olive Oil.
Sure.
It's a beautiful poem.
Thank you. Late Night Olive Oil. Let us put the letters and fears and boiling emotions on the page, Mummy. Why did you go to the kitchen stealthily without a word to your sleeping son, without your walker, to find the large bottle of olive oil, to pour it on the table and floor, to fill a small vessel which you meant to carry back to your room, as if nobody would notice until you called my name, because you could not negotiate the rest of the way from dining table to bedroom, vessel in hand, without cane or walker. I write to atone for my flailing words, saying, never, never, never again. The kitchen is prohibited. Your mania for oil in the hair is prohibited. The stealthy, mischievous, childish, truant foray into the darkness with a torch in hand, which you forgot on the countertop, all of this is prohibited. Your losing memory and control are prohibited. These words are prohibited. Decline and death are prohibited. So that's Late Night Olive Oil. Yeah.
So
And,
beautiful. It's so
thank you.
beautiful. I completely loved it.
Thank you.
Kashiana, yes, please, Indran.
No. It's and that's why this book, though it's a book of so to speak, political poems, is that and beyond that, and
Sure,
and the word
absolutely.
is valuable,
Yes,
because we
yes.
have a tendency to think of political poems as a sort of shouted on at Speaker's
Mm,
Corner at Hyde
mm,
Park or something, but
mm.
no, they can be very, very different.
Oh,
Anyway,
as Kashiana said, it could be politics in the kitchen, and those could be murmurs, but they could be huge shout outs in the heart somewhere, so works both
that's right.
ways. Yeah. Kashiana, you have a wonderful TED video, Work is Worship. Would you like to talk about that topic? Because I think it's extremely passionate about it. So would you like to?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we can spend a few minutes, and I just refer to it as we were talking about the reconciliation of
Sure.
what you call your job and your job with a small j, which is the career that you have, and your job with a big J, which is the job that you think you've come out in this world to do. Or like Indran said, right, you have to write because at a basic level you need to write, right? That's what makes you, that's how you survive, that's how you thrive. So to say, in simple terms, work is worship. And I'll get to how I end the talk, which is the philosophy of Guru Nanak, right? And Guru Nanak, who is one of the main gurus of the Sikh community follows, but a lot of others read him as well. His primary approach was about penance or meditation or worship does not need to be going into the Himalayas and performing penance and being a monk or a mendicant, right, for X number of years. But he said the highest level of meditation and worship happens when you are actually living your daily life as a common man with your family and your children and your work. And he was the son of a businessman, right, like a shopkeeper, and doing your work, but doing all of that with the worship on a day-to-day basis. So that's the essence of it. And it's, again, where and how can we ever even reach the thought process of somebody as profound, right, as him? But in simple ways, what I think we bring to our daily lives, both in terms of the dailiness. Go back to Mary Oliver and her ability to find wonder, right, in just the daily moments and the daily objects and nature around her, and walking into the woods every day with a pencil in hand and being able to write that, whether it's that aspect of worship, or it's the ability like you said, to walk to a very job and find those moments that connect you to the higher spiritual portion of your own soul or the universe, or it's and I think if we channel and are able to find that, it kind of just then starts to resolve a lot of other things for us. And we know our dear Thay. I think you wrote, Sunil, about Thay, or we had one of the others.
Yes.
We've just been reading, right, about him and what he brought to the table. And what's probably not highlighted about him is that he was also a rebel, right? Like he rebelled against the monastic tradition to go fight for his country. But even through all of that, he's the largest voice around on what mindfulness should be.
Sure.
And how did he do that with his most diminutive personality? Is the ability to really say that happiness is here in your core. It's right around us in moments, and the ability to find that and then make those dewdrops your way of finding worship. So in a sense, that's what I say. Personally, it does connect to Woman by the Door and the theme of loss and grieving. And like, I think it's Macbeth maybe, where there's that quote about give sorrow words. And it also is give sorrow an ability to find ways of worship, right? So I can tell you that for my own period of extreme loss, and when I was going through the grief, the peak of the grief, and you're in denial, etc., the cycles of grief, I found I worked the most and the hardest at that point in time, not because I was trying to divert my mind, but because I was actually finding at work moments that would help me live in my grief, because that would help then heal, right? Finding moments of healing at work and living in the grief. So that's really where I go with it. I think we're getting too serious, so we should come back.
How beautiful. How beautiful. Why don't we leaven it up with a poem of yours?
Sure. I'm going to try and see which one I pick. Give me a moment. Let's go with Curds and Whey, since we've been talking about the Curds and Whey.
It's a universal favorite here.
Yeah. So the poem's titled "In My Nani's House, Curds and Whey Were a Religion." Rendered warm, the milk in homage to perfect temperature, every drop just enough, dripping a muted prayer on Nani's wrist. Stately, it would reside on the dining table in a glazed terracotta pot, its tenderness in immaculate gospel. Spoonfuls smooth like rays of moon, and attentive healing of my acidic chest, kindness revealed after rested nights. Persisting in pause and patience in my Nani's house, sallow in its maturing, whisked tidally into incubation, the ritual of curd making harnessed my attention for precision and process for transformation. An unveiling of the delectable aphrodisiac on albaster mornings, always a ceremony. I have failed to assemble curd like that. Mine settles in watery mouthfuls of regret. It tastes hollow like an afterthought. Forgetting to tighten its surface muscles, it collects into itself, refusing to be real, curd metamorphosized. I have tried so much to do what Nani did, but the curd I make always looks like half-fulfilled wishes, as if it is telling me to have more patience, wants me to breathe in, breathe out, and stir the silence. The chewy curd I assemble is reluctant, uncondensed, unlike metabolic grace in Nani's. I had stood beside her more often, watched her more closely. Her eyes an emblem of Agni, Akash, and expanse in her arms. I wish I knew then that she was Prithvi, holding hostage and intoxication. I wish I had gathered stillness. I wish I had surrendered my questions to making of curd. There she is, looking at me sideways, sari pallu, sweeping to her waist, a shining plate, pomegranate lips. Curds and Whey in my hands.
This is absolutely stunning. Absolutely stunning. You know, it's so particular to to India, but it's so universal in its emotion. I mean, that's the whole charm of this poem. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Was there a point in your creative life, Kashiana, when it dawned on you that poetry was the way forward for you as a pursuit? Is it something which happened early in your life, and how did it span out?
Hard to say moment, right? Like this, I think it's hard for anybody to say,
Sure.
oh, aha, like I'm going to do poetry. That's the aha moment. But what I recollect, and going back to poems of memory and childhood, what I can tell you two or three things that are etched sharp and I know played some defining role in whatever little I'm doing today in terms of being still a learner. I'm nowhere, I don't think I'm even a poet yet, but I'm learning to be a poet, right? Uh, and that is number one, my father making me and my sister stand and teaching us and helping us practice The Boy Stood on the Burning Deck, Casablanca, and
Wow.
Oh Captain, My Captain. Uh, and at some point, she and I both, my sister's younger to me by 3.5, 4 years, but we both in our school probably did those, between those two poems, a couple of different times, and every time we would win a prize or something. So that's one, right? I can still recite Casablanca by heart and Oh Captain, My Captain, and those were two of his favorite poems. So that's one. The second is my first poem got published when in some teenage magazine or something. I'm sure it was a useless poem, right, by all standards, but my parents and made it seem like it was a big deal and it was the best poem written in the universe. And
Oh.
they would keep that little magazine at the coffee table, and every person who entered or exited the house was compelled to read the poem that was written by Kashiana, right? I think that encouragement, the positive reinforcement of
Yeah.
what I did, made me believe that I could write
Mm.
poetry while subtly and gently teaching craft and encouraging reading and asking to read, etc., etc. So those two, and then the last thing I'll say is my name is unique, of course, right?
Yes.
And it actually means Ashiana is, everybody knows Ashiana, which is home, house, dwelling, etc. And then Kashiana is what my father decided to name me, and it means a nest of love. And he would always say, I did not choose Ashiana for you. I chose Kashiana because I expect you to be a creative, poetic
How
soul.
lovely. How
Right.
lovely.
So
How lovely.
those
Very
three are what
prophetic.
define.
Right. Yeah.
Wonderful. Indran, you write poetry, but your life seems like a novel. I mean, there's no quibbling about that.
No question.
No
Yeah.
question. You were born in Sri Lanka. You study in London. You move to Hawaii, do your masters in Columbia, USA, and professionally you are with this US State Department. I mean, in between, of course, you've picked up Spanish and French and Portuguese. I'm not even sure which other language. I mean, that's a truckload, if not a full universe of influence. So I'm very curious to know, how do you decide what to write on and in which language at any given point of time?
Yeah, no, thank you. It's been the one benefit of being a diplomat is in the learning of languages, and when I learn a language, I do it in a very obsessive way. I mean, I don't want to just learn enough to manage at a cocktail party or in a meeting, but I want to learn the language in a way that person on the street, who sells me fish knows the language, or the person in the library, the librarian knows the language. I mean, I have this very complete, absolute approach. So I do my best. I keep working. I'm always a student of these languages, and I'm learning expressions every day. It's hard to keep up with all of them at the same time, but I feel like I can go to sleep tired in one language and wake up refreshed in another, So
I
there's a
love
sense of
that.
you could just wake up every
Beautiful.
morning several times a day with each language, So that keeps me going. And then I set myself little tasks, writing a poem in each of the languages in the course of the day or something, and that I've done occasionally. So and it's an exercise. I mean, just like keeping fit. I mean, if you exercise the language, you keep growing in the language. So right now, I exercise in three languages regularly. I mean, especially in French and Spanish, where I write. I have a column that I need to furnish, and it's a poem, which I particularly love the fact that I've been able to get a poem through the censors, so to speak, into a newspaper on a regular
I
basis.
know.
And I do that. So I write in French in one case, though I could write in Creole there as well. And I have in the past, but not recently. And I write in Spanish in the other. So the Portuguese and the Haitian Creole are the other languages that I know. And so I keep up with Haitian Creole just because of some practical reasons here at home. The lady who helps giving care to my mother is Haitian, and so I speak with her in Creole on a regular basis. And then Portuguese, I write occasionally now in Portuguese, but not on a regular basis. So I have to brush up in Portuguese. So it's a sort of endless task of trying to keep up, but it keeps me alive, very much alive, and very refreshed. And then why do I do it? I mean, one wonders. I've been a border crosser all my life, and including crossing the language borders. And I once started in Mexico many years ago. I shared some of my first poems in Spanish with a poet there who sort of pushed back and said, "Well, why do you write in Spanish? I mean, you should be writing in English. That's your language. Stay there." And I didn't like that idea. I don't like to be told I cannot do this. I don't like to be told that I don't belong. For me, belonging is fundamental, and maybe that's part of my sense of being a migrant too. That I belong to the English language. I belong to the American language. I belong also to the Ceylonese language, the Sri Lankan language. I mean, English is one of the languages of the island. So I don't really suffer too much um, problems of the paperwork. I mean, I belong, for example, in an anthology in Mexico. Uh, my poems in Spanish were included in an anthology and published in northern Mexico of poets from Nuevo León, which is a state in northern Mexico. To me, that's a big badge of pride, that I've been included in that anthology, as if I was born in that landscape and come from there. I was once invited to Oaxaca in Mexico to a meeting of local writers, in other words, poets and writers born in the state of Oaxaca, which includes various indigenous communities and many different native languages like Zapotec and Mixtec and so on. And I was the only sort of, so to speak, Indian included, from.
Wow.
And again, I felt honored by the invitation, and I made the effort, and I went to this small town in the state of Oaxaca, in the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. I think I'm forgetting now the exact name of the place. And so I guess it's an idealist point of view that to celebrate crossing borders freely, and
Sure.
in this world where there's so many limitations to that sort of idealism or that kind of utopian idea. But I do believe in it. It gives me purpose, and so I don't think when you come to belief, that belief will be excised from me or extracted from me, and it will just keep informing
Wonderful.
the poetry that I write. Yeah.
Wonderful. It's such a privilege, I must say. Love to hear a poem from 10,000 Steps.
Thank you. I'd be happy to. How about let me pick one that there is a. uh, just open the book, and it's a very short, small poem called "The Right Path." But I think perhaps sometimes brevity works. Let's see. Let us roll, America. Let us not look back. Let us seize the fellow by the absent coat tail. Let us reveal the traipsing emperor nude, and let us remember and defend the rights of our virus dead. But let us do so with respect, with love. Why? Because Jesus says so. Why? Because we are not jackals and hyenas. Why? Because we have to get back on the road to the promised land, right path.
I love,
So
love, love, love
Beautiful.
that poem.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
And
So
rightly
just,
said, it's brevity which brings out the punch in it. It's wonderfully done.
thank you for the chance to read. Yeah, I mean, I'm very close. Obviously, each book is a child, and I've 22 children or something in terms of books. But I have two biological children as well who inform, who are everywhere in these books. And love, as I said earlier, it's a wonderful emotion. It's without it, I don't really know how one can live. And so um, there's a, and I think we can reduce our footprint on the planet. We can make practical steps towards conservation, and we just have to do this on an individual basis as well as within the family and within the community and within the nation at large and within the international community at large. So these are these are belief systems that I have that inform these poems as well, these 10,000 steps. Each step it's a metaphor for what we can each do and or should do and are doing perhaps. I like to think of the glass as half full, despite all these terrible signs around, yet we are here and we are talking tonight.
Absolutely. Kashiana, love to hear a poem from you.
Let's go with brevity as a theme. So I'm a new learner, and I'm a learner poet, but I got introduced to haiku a couple of years ago, and I'll probably read a haiku garland. This was published in the Rattle a couple of months ago, and it's called Normal. Rare blue moon, another ambulance and blue lights. Rare blue moon, another ambulance and blue lights. Obituaries, age, color, caste, no bar. Tourist season, an empty colosseum of silent coffins. Tourist season, an empty colosseum of silent coffins. War zones, a worldwide bunker of chaos. Shallow breaths, grandma whispers a final blessing. Cancelled flights, the Godwit migrates again this year. Cancelled flights, the Godwit migrates again this year. Ocean waves, the dip and rise of economics. Ocean waves, the dip and rise of economics. This is, I think, middle of last year. Obviously, it speaks to what was going on at that time.
Right. Wonderfully done. Wonderfully done. And haikus sometimes, they like drips of water, dab, 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 and suddenly you find a whole flood creating, it's wonderfully done. How beautiful.
And I just, one word on haiku and why it resonated with me. It again goes back to the theme of worship and meditation and just the art of observation and the art of reduction that is required to be able to do a haiku in itself is almost like an act of meditation because you keep peeling the layers of the onion.
Sure. Wonderful. We've done an hour. Would you like to recite one more poem? And let me see if I can edit it in. It'll be wonderful. So, Indran, a poem from you to end with?
Sure. Um, Perhaps I'll read a poem from another book called Blue
Sure,
Window.
sure.
That just and I'll read the original Spanish and then the translation into English. It's a short, relatively short poem.
Mm.
So it's called Viaje or Trip. Este viaje, cada uno por su cuenta, tú hacia la montaña, yo al mar, tú con nuevos amigos y con tiempo para reflexionar, yo a ver a mi hija, el fruto del pasado, y a unos amigos nuevos, una hija alta y bella, casi un adolescente a punto de despegar. ¿A dónde? A una nueva ciudad, al futuro que le espera otra vez en el Padre. A mí no me gusta lo impermanente y darme cuenta del límite de la costa. ¿Qué opciones me quedan? No regresar, no dar algún consejo a este ser vivo al que ayudé a caminar, guardar el silencio cuando cada memoria quiere hablar. Trip, in the translation of Jennifer Rathbun. We are on a trip, each one of us on our own, you towards the mountain, I to the sea, you with new friends and time to reflect, I to see my daughter, fruit of the past, and a few friends still on this side of the sea. I don't know how to take advantage of the contrast, mountain, sea, new friends, a tall and beautiful daughter, almost an adolescent ready to take off. Where to? A new city, to a future that awaits her again without her father. I don't like the impermanent and realize the limit of the coast. What options are left for me? Not return, not give some advice to this living being whom I helped teach to walk, keep silent when every memory wants to talk. Thank you.
Oh, this is so beautiful. I don't know, when you were reading, I kept thinking of Naomi Shihab Nye for some reason. I just don't know why.
Yes.
It seemed to have whiffs of the way she writes. Wonderful, Indran.
Oh,
I
she
loved
was
it.
very kind to me. She
She wrote a
wrote a
blurb.
comment
Yes,
about,
yes, she
yeah,
did. I
very
read
kind.
that.
Yeah.
One of my favorite poets.
Thank you.
Kashiana.
Just the way you read the Spanish, even though I don't think Sunil or the musicality of it, to your
Yes,
point, Hindran, was like, it was just beautiful.
it's wonderfully done.
Thank you.
Do you want me to go with one?
Yes, please.
Okay. I'm going to read one that I haven't read in a long while, but I think this is a fitting one to read. And it's called How a Woman Delivers Hope. She embroiders the tundra with her hushed moans, breathless, as a tightness tugs and untugs within her, hesitating, punctuating. She watches the air meet flesh at the outline of her being, as calm unsettles into rivulets flowing from inside of her. She pushes into beginnings and rises into endings. Still, patient, warrior, woman, giving birth. As the universe tumri swirling slogans into light, she follows other women, their flaming, screaming, their breathing as her urging sinew and muscle shift, pulsing her towards life. She renews herself with a sumptuous feast of goddess light. As it ebbs and flows, unfurling grit, reciting the new, reciting the new, reciting the new, as the midwife guides, she oozes eternity into the space between her thighs, rising into a crescendo. The protests outside grow vacant with cries. She enunciates freedom for her body and offers an exile to that which was held within hers, pushing, brimming, pushing, bearing, delivering hope into a pregnant pause, and a glistening head now emerges. Into the hands of her convulsing grace, into fragility of a land that walks barefoot into earthmen that peddle her to goddesses, into monuments that stand on quicksands, into rivers sterile for their bleeding dry, into flags that flutter with septic infusions, into stuttering prayers of a laboring country. How a woman leaves behind drenched stories sputtering from the stone of her wasted wombs, she delivers enough, drenched, wet, unfolding hope. How a woman delivers hope. Thank you.
Magnificent. Thank you.
Thank you.
Magnificent is the word. It's so beautiful. Oh my God. My hair was standing on its end. Thank you so much, Indran Kashiana. This has been
Thank
such
you.
a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
I'm so happy we
Oh,
did this.
not only a pleasure, a blessing, Sunil. Very lovely. You're conducting us through this on this trip, which has been really a very lovely and moving conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for your
It didn't feel
candor.
like we were doing this for any other reason. Like I said to you, Sunil, like it felt like an adda that we were just, since
It
you're in
was.
Kolkata,
It
that we're
was.
just sitting and having our conversation. And that's the beauty of
Absolutely.
it. So we'll carry it with us for a long while.
Thank you so much. And I hope to hopefully meet up with you either in USA or in India whenever you travel here or I travel there.
Inshallah. Soon.
Inshallah.
I hope so. I hope so
Absolutely.
to be soon. Yes. I'm in Washington, near Washington, D.C. So
Sure.
please come when you come to the U.S. And I know you are in Calcutta, and you are the reason, not Mother Teresa, but for me to visit next.
Kashiana, the
Whenever I do
reference
visit.
being, I was telling him people travel to Calcutta either because they're Bengalis or for Mother Teresa. No other
Because
reason.
Sorry, I do respect Mother Teresa. I don't mean to her memory. Anyway, and to go, I must admit, to go.
Yes,
as
of
well.
course. Yes, of
Visit
course.
it.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sunil,
you.
for
Thank you.
responding quickly and for making this happen.